And we are live. Welcome everybody to Lubbock Compact Live for Wednesday, January 3rd. This is our second show of the year, actually. We had a special show yesterday, and this is our regularly scheduled show on Wednesdays. And we are here this evening. I'm your host, Adam Hernandez, with my co-host, Josh Shakles. And we have special guest, Dr. Jessica Smith with us, who is on the board of Sexism Cinema. And if you're not sure what Sexism Cinema is or you haven't heard about it, we're going to talk all about it and let you know. Dr. Smith is on the board of directors for Sexism Cinema. She's also affiliated with the Department of English over at Texas Tech. She is also a writer, has a book coming out soon, so hopefully she'll plug that tonight. And we're going to learn all about Sexism Cinema. And Josh, go ahead and kick us off.
Yeah, Jessica, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. We're all just getting to know. So many times we have guests that are people we have a long history with, but we're all just getting to know each other. Can you just start with the baseline and introduce yourself to our audience? Tell us a little bit about your, career path and how you got here to Lubbock.
Well, first, thank you both so much for having me, and thank you everyone who's joining or watching later. My name is Jessica Smith. I am an assistant professor of practice in the Department of English. My specialty is poetry, actually. And I did my MFA at the New School in New York City, and then I was sort of seeking a deepening of my own pedagogy. So I went to get a PhD, came to Texas Tech for my PhD in poetry, and then was lucky enough to stay in this community. During my time as a PhD candidate, I became friends with and involved with the people who had already founded Sexism Cinema. And my dissertation work was on the way, and my continued research is on the way that intimate partner violence in particular is represented in film, in TV, and social media. So for example, a film like Sleeping with the Enemy, or even a song like, oh my goodness, Goodbye Earl, or the Amber Heard trial and the way it played out on social media. So that's what a lot of my dissertation work was on. So the work I was doing dovetailed quite nicely with already what the series was working on. And that's how I became involved.
Neat, very cool. And let's dig into the meat of it. Tell us about Sexism Cinema and what this looks like. Some of your I was about to say conspirators, but it's like
co-directors.
You take my point. It's been a long day.
No, I totally understand.
Tell us about it. Yeah,
we're conspiring to bring more movies to Lubbock. So basically, the advertising, the poster basics would be that it's a partnership between Texas Tech and Alamo Drafthouse, and also we've had all different kinds of other campus and community sponsors over the years that vary, but there's definitely been a lot of involvement and support from, the Humanities Center, from RISE, from all different kinds of organizations. But it's on Wednesday nights, the first Wednesday of every month during the semester. We screen a film. It's part of Film Club, so some people who are watching might be already familiar with Film Club, which is every Wednesday night. But the specifics of ours is that we discuss films that through the framework of what's happening with gender in this film, what's happening with class in this film, how our gender, sexuality, class, race, keep on going, right? All the way down the line, depending on which film we're exploring. I feel like we tend to touch on a panopticon of ideas in the film, but we might focus on one a little bit more depending on the film. Our only criteria for film selection is that there is a female identifying protagonist. Which can sometimes be harder to find than you would think. And we love if it's a female identifying director or writers, which is also a little bit harder to find sometimes. So the criteria, those are the main criteria, and also that Alamo can screen it. There's been a lot of films that we would have loved to screen, but there's permissions issues and whatnot. And yeah, it's an interdisciplinary team. You asked about my co-directors, right? Yeah, interdisciplinary. So myself, I'm creative writer. Dr. Michael Borshuk, he does American literature, jazz studies. We have Doctors Dana Weiser and Elizabeth Sharp and Dr. Christy Rogers, who are all in human development and family sciences, but in different specialties. Dr. Allison Whitney, who's also in the Department of English and does film. She's a film expert, actually. She's sort of our main actual film expert. So she's fascinating in terms of talking about the framing of a scene or the history of the film, the tradition that the film might be working into. And then our newest member, Dr. Christy Rogers, I said her. And then Dr. Don Levine, who's a classicist in classical and modern languages and literatures. So he brings this kind of ancient knowledge to the film. Like when we did with the film Chirac. You know this movie?
I have not known.
Okay. Well, we screened it, it feels like a million years ago now, maybe 2000 pre-pandemic, so 2018, and it's a reimagining of Lysistrata. So, for example, it's really fascinating to get the historical perspective on Lysistrata and expertise from someone like who's a classicist, which you wouldn't always get. And also one of our goals was to bring films to Lubbock that might not otherwise be marketed here or available here.
Yeah, that's really cool. So um I think this is a crazy question, but might
Okay.
not be for a lot of people out there. Um I'm very aware that in our culture, even with our young people, so I mentor young boys and girls groups at OL Slayton Middle School. So these are middle school students, and we've already had issues with all of these groups, sixth, seventh, and eighth grade boys groups in particular, where there's already some problematic behavior when it comes to how they engage with women, including women who are teachers. And so I'm very aware that there's a pervasive problem on top of the fact that, you know, I've lived life for 42 years and have seen plenty of things. But for those who may be living under a rock, maybe they got a blind spot. Why are conversations around sexism still so important?
Um, so yes, sexism is real and happen, right? You know, and it's not just men who are sexist, right? Certainly women can be, you know, people of all gender identifications can engage in sexism because it's a structural issue, right? It's not necessarily an individual issue. I mean, of course, it ends up being individual, but it's structural. And I guess the way I would speak to that is we internalize so many ideas from media. I grew up watching Friends, for example, and I loved it. And I would try to dress like Rachel Green. Friends was on Thursday nights, and I would try to dress like Rachel Green on Fridays. And that's kind of a cute story, but it also means that I had this specific idea of femininity and what a feminine appearance was. And that kind of spirals out into all these other ideas about identity that I might have had and probably still work against or work alongside maybe. So teaching, you know, in the classroom, I talk a lot about mediated values, the way we mediate value from what we read, what we watch, music. And so to think about, so for example, have you seen 16 Candles, the John Hughes film?
Yeah, sure.
I may have very long time ago.
Okay. Well, I'm sure a lot of it's one of the more popular films we've screened, and we try to film a balance of popular kind of blockbuster films. Like we've done Bring It On. We've done some horror blockbuster films with maybe more like repertory, indie, foreign, you know, a little bit of a balance. But we did 16 Candles. Um, and I won't go through the plot of the film, but it's kind of a great beloved favorite in the United States. And there were people who were really, I will say, there are people in the audience who are a little disgruntled at our takedown of some of the occurrences in the film because the person who was our speaker that night was talking quite a bit about a non-consensual sexual engagement in the film. And that can be really hard for people to think about that they saw that and that they sort of enjoyed it or that they were part of a structural group that thought, oh, this is so funny. Oh, you know, she seems okay in the morning, which is how the film portrays it. Again, and I won't give the whole plot of the film. So I'm not sure I'm fully answering your question, but basically it's our attempt to start a conversation about ideas we may have not considered, ourselves included, on the team. I've certainly come up against ideas that I had not interrogated for myself. And also ways that maybe sexism is fought against in film, right? The ways that multiple different identities and possibilities are celebrated. So it's not always just like, look at all this sexism in the movie, right? Sometimes it's a celebratory conversation.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. I mean, I just want to unpack this for like a million years, because it's
Okay.
like you watch a film, and at least if you're like me, the first thing you want to do is like talk it up and talk about all these things that are in it. And I think it's really kind of interesting to like use media as kind of an avenue for that, because it's still challenging. If you're taking it on, it challenges all of us. And like, I would readily, we all participate in this thing that has us programmed and wired up, and with kind of automatic systems that kind of just go right through our brain. That's how our brain works for everything, is like taking shortcuts to
Mm,
understanding.
sure.
And so I think this is so interesting to like use media, especially something like film, to kind of dig at that, because in another way, it's kind of like less confrontational, because you can kind of like put it on this third thing, you know, and use that as the analytical tool, instead of it just being like person to person and really having to like dig in at those things in like such a direct way. Um, I'm not really sure that I'm getting to a question
No,
here,
you're
like, but I just think it's kind of interesting to use this tool. All the time in our household, it comes like every time we hear a love song. This is kind of a parallel track, but
mm,
like we hear these love songs, and often in my own household, we're like, girl, love yourself. Stop being all like love yourself, leave this
right,
guy. This is an unhealthy way to think about
sure.
love, how you're like so wrapped around the axle over it.
Mhm.
But yeah, it kind of like just goes back into this same sort of thing where like, until I had thought about that, I was just like, oh, aren't these all these sappy love songs like so freaking great? And it's
Sure.
like, no, actually, a lot of them are reflecting like a really unhealthy self perspective or relationship dynamic or whatever. And like, until you take even a moment to interrogate that, you don't even think about it. It doesn't stop you necessarily from liking that song. And so I don't know. I'm not like getting to a thing. I'm just like talking from my own
No, you are. You're
perspective.
making me think about two important things that I would love to share with y'all and with the
Yeah.
audience, but the audience. So one of our sort of founding principles is to make draining or upsetting topics, to kind of put them in a fun framework,
Mm-hmm,
because it's
mm-hmm.
we get drained and upset by these topics too. And also academic jargon is exhausting. And most of us don't live in that world. Even those of us who work in academia, most of us live in the world where you're going home and putting on the movie or putting on the music or binge watching whatever. And it's also something that we all share. Uh, Most
Mm-hmm.
people watch movies, most people listen to music, as you're describing it. And so I think that that was what you're describing is exactly what we wanted to do, is think about how do we talk about these issues without being distancing, without being so sure of ourselves and our kind of academic word salad, depending on the field, and also connect the university, a community organization, and the community. And our audience tends to be a real mix, as opposed to sometimes at the university, you get typically a more predominantly university audience. And at Alamo Drafthouse, you never know who's kind of going to come in. And it's great for students too. A lot of students come for extra credit and whatnot, and relieved of the pressure of the classroom. It's always fascinating to see what they discuss. And then the other thing that you made me think about is this idea of like, oh, you can't enjoy anything anymore, right? Like there's sort of this attitude now, like, oh, you have to. And I'm like, I can both understand what's happening or how this may be acting upon me, and also enjoy. Like those two things can happen at the same. Like you're still listening to those love songs, right? And singing along, you're just yelling back.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
this is an idea that we often talk about in our work and in other
Mm.
areas, but just because we've done a thing for a long time doesn't mean that that's what we should be doing. And so I don't really see an issue with, obviously, how our cultures progress or evolve, that's going to end up in our art, right? It's going to end up in our films and our music. But that doesn't necessarily mean that those ideas are just all solid and that we should just wholeheartedly accept them, right? Even though, yeah, we may enjoy the beat of the music or we may enjoy certain parts of this film. But like you said, both things can be true at the same time, right? Like I can enjoy some parts of this film, but also realize that some parts of it are some BS, right?
Right.
And call that out and talk about how that's problematic. And so, yeah, just wanted to add that in there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I think that's like right on the mark, and it really you kind of took up the next question that we
Oh,
had
cool.
on here, like I was saying before the show slightly. I didn't want to like open it up entirely, but our organization well, it's like organized around the issue of disparity, it, inequity. And so a lot of our work focuses around that, particularly for our organization, like public policy and the built environment. That's where the center of our work is. But we have so many different people on the show that have a kind of an intersecting or a tangent point to this. And so, yeah, like you already kind of talked about this a little bit, like how you make connections to a bigger public, and how we get people disarmed and engaged to look at that, and also how we take our institutions, something like Texas Tech, and make them more relevant to the broader public that supports them. And I don't know, maybe you have more to say about that or more to unpack there.
Well, you're making me think about, yeah, I mean, some of what I said, but also about our speaker selection and
Oh,
our
right.
different speakers. Because we've done panels and individual speakers. With the time constraints of, I mean, it's only about 20, 30 minutes of conversation afterward, just because of, the Alamo Drafthouse has to close and people have to go home. But I tend to prefer when it's a single speaker, just because because the panel, there's often a lot of sort of, no, you go, no, you go, which takes up time, which I understand. But, we don't just have academics come speak. And often I've found when we invite someone from a community organization or someone who is outside of Lubbock also, right? We've had people on Zoom in the theater, their faces on the screens and whatnot. We've had directors of the films, and people from all over, as I said, the local community, who run different organizations or have expertise that somehow pertains to what we see as the central issue being addressed in the film. Then we open up a whole new audience, because people want to come see their friend or people want to come see their colleague. And for me, especially as kind of a baby academic, it's been excellent to observe the institution happening in real time, as opposed to in the kind of codified frameworks of the classroom or of like the faculty meeting. And to watch the work that I do in the classroom, where students are there to like get an A, they're there to learn, but they have a kind of end goal. But to just be out in the community with the work I know, with the work I do and love, but then speaking in a totally sometimes uncomfortable way for me, right? Because I'm not used to different, I don't know, there's all different kinds of lexicons around different areas of
Sure.
expertise. And so I hope that answers part of what you're asking me about. And sometimes I go into the film assuming the conversation is going to go one way, and that's fine too. That's exciting too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we do have a couple of comments, Josh, before you get into the next
Yeah.
thing. But Dane Norman is actually very dismayed that I've never seen 16 Candles. Dane, you would probably be frustrated if you heard all of the movies that I have not seen that so many people have seen. I don't get to catch a lot of movies even now, so this is not something uncommon for me, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on who you're talking to. So that was one comment that was pretty funny. But Kim says that, and she's been a speaker at Sexism
Yeah.
Cinema before,
Hello,
and she
Kim.
says, she says, I've been to Sexism Cinema many times, and I love that it gives us an opportunity to see films that I may not normally see otherwise. So do you get that a lot? Like, because again, that's my story. I know Kim is the same way. Kim is my girlfriend, by the way, and
Mhm.
we're the same. Like, we haven't seen a bunch of movies that like people have seen, but are you finding that people are being exposed to these films that have just never seen them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we screen, like I said, we every semester we try to have sort of one blockbuster, one genre film, maybe one foreign, and sometimes we screen things that are quite a bit older. Like we screened Adam's Rib, which I believe is from 1939. We just did Dial M for Murder, 1954. And it's sort of fascinating to see these are not films that would come into the local theaters. And unless you're seeking them out on streaming services, you're not going to watch them. And certainly you're not going to think about, well, what did Dial M for Murder was this huge hit. What did Hitchcock, what was Hitchcock's impact? How has that reverberated into contemporary filmmaking and society? How is this woman portrayed in a film from 1954? And of course, sometimes when you watch older films, you can kind of be like, oh, that's then, this is now. But we often effort to say, okay, like what hasn't changed maybe. But yeah, I absolutely, even for myself, there are movies that I would probably not even necessarily choose to watch. Like I'm not necessarily that interested in Adam's Rib, but it was fascinating to have this speaker come in and and I felt you get to feel like a student again too, as you often do. And I do think that when we have these kind of loyal attendees, they are willing to kind of go, they're willing to follow us through, right? Even if they're not sure. And because we're an interdisciplinary team, we often pick, the if one semester is maybe not as exciting to certain community members or audience members, the next semester hopefully will be. And
Yeah.
Adam, I
So,
hope you come and see some more movies with us.
yeah, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Or speak for us.
Oh yeah, sure,
Yeah,
for
both of
sure.
you.
I'd be up for
Mhm.
that. So I guess the next question I have maybe in two parts. So
Okay.
you obviously watch a bunch of films. Your team watches a bunch of films. Are there? I mean, I'm sure there are, but what sort of patterns of sexism do you often see in films? And like, has this changed over
Hmm.
time? I guess is the second part. Have you seen any progress or regression or whatever in some of these I guess patterns, if you are seeing patterns, or maybe there
Yeah.
aren't patterns.
That's a great question. I will say that especially on our team, I am not the film expert. We have, like I said, Dr. Allison Whitney, certainly, Dr. Michael Borshuk is also a film scholar. I can speak to the work I do, but what I will say is there's a lot of films that are being made that break the patterns and that are fascinating, and do bizarre, surprising, and also very of the moment, right? The way that people are actually living and treating each other. Um, and kind of resist the tropes that we do see, but those films are not getting as much marketing necessarily, not getting as much funding. I think I'm seeing some more exciting things happen in film right now, but again, I'm not a film expert, so I don't want to speak to that. But what I can say is that in my research on intimate partner violence, so what I've researched in the 20th century and 21st century is the way that victims and abusers in romantic relationships are represented in media generally. And the trend there is that the abuser it's typically a man and a woman in a heterosexual relationship. And the man is like a monster, just terrifying, creepy, scary, shadowy figure. And the woman is kind of this mute angel who escapes in the middle of the night and changes her hair and then meets a new nice guy while she's hiding out in a small town, right? This is sort of and then in the end, she either accidentally or on purpose kills the abuser. That's the trope of the films about intimate partner violence, including ones that are a little bit more maybe progress or maybe like thinking in different ways, like Big Little Lies. I don't know if either of you watched Big Little Lies, but it's sort of troubled some of these notions. But then in the end, sorry, spoiler alert, mute if you don't want to know this. They still have this moment where the abuser is killed, and there's no exploration of the trauma of that for the victim, of the long-term implications of that. Also, this idea that a victim has to be perfect is problematic in so many areas of society. And so my research has certainly shown me that it continues to be that if a victim is not unimpeachable, it's not worth representing typically in film. She has to kind of be beautiful, quiet, retreating. Her injuries have to look a certain way. And I will say, I think we see this play out on social media too, like with the Amber Heard Johnny Depp trial, and the kind of the way that the two of them were presented fit into those tropes quite well, I would say. So that's what I can speak to. But in terms of like larger film trends, I would not be as expert as some of my colleagues. So come to a screening and they'll say more.
Yeah, for sure. We do have another question here from Dane. He says, Jessica, what has been the biggest reevaluation of a movie for you? A movie you watched when younger, but after more life experience and education, you view the movie in a different light, either good or bad.
Can I ask Dane a question, like of ones we've screened or in general for my life?
I think he's just talking about in general for just your
Okay.
life. Yeah.
Certainly the Friends series, as I discussed with you at the beginning. And again, as I said, you can find something different than you thought it was, and you can find it to have instructed you in ways that were maybe not serving you, and still see what you enjoyed about it. In terms of a reevaluation of films, I think the John Hughes films in general, Pretty in Pink, 16 Candles, even something like Home Alone, these are all John Hughes films, and rewatching them, Home Alone sounds a little silly because it's supposed to be a kids movie, but there's the mother is presented as like having a job and like being sort of a busy, and I remember being like, but then she forgets her son, right? So I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, if I have a job, I'll forget my, just these little things that you internalize. But I would say, yeah, 16 Candles, Pretty in Pink, later, and those are movies I loved when I was like 11, 12, and yeah, to see them again as an adult. And then again, like during my PhD and under this framework, was surprising.
Yeah, and real quick, Josh, before you go in, I do remember something just from my own experience that I've seen happen over time is like when I was younger, Dirty Dancing was like a huge movie, still is. A lot of people enjoy Dirty Dancing and the whole thing. But then I started to see like later on, especially like during the pandemic times and stuff, where people were like, "Hold on, this is like not healthy at all. Like this is not something we should be celebrating or like
Yeah.
getting into." But that's just something that I had noticed. Josh, what do you got here?
We screened Dirty Dancing. Yeah,
Oh, nice.
yeah.
I'm trying to rethink. There's something about Roadhouse that keeps sticking in my head, but
Patrick
now that I'm
Swayze.
thinking about it, the girlfriend in Roadhouse is pretty forceful and has a generally pretty healthy relationship, except she lets the doctor, except she lets him murder everybody else, all the enemies, and then she's like, "We're cool now." Anyway,
Such a good
okay.
point. We couldn't screen it for Sex and the City.
I wasn't for this, but now that everybody's dead, we're cool. I guess what I was gonna ask was, how can how can we look at our films and media and books and just like all the things that we interact with, like how can we maybe take a more critical and questioning and referencing back to a previous guest from late last year, like how can we have kind of a sort of radical humility about what we're taking on and look at it with a critical eye again and maybe interrogate that in our own lives, like what are some.
Are you touching on the way that sort of people, myself included, can feel defensive of the things they love or the
Of
media
course.
love? Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's both of it. It's like how can we intentionally take in what media we're doing and interrogate that, but also let down our defensiveness so that critiques or different things don't bum us out or make us kind of reject that sort of thing outright.
Right. I mean, that is a question that I wish I knew like the definitive answer to, right? And I'd actually really interested to hear y'all's thoughts as well, because I'm sure you're having these conversations weekly. I think that for me, it's what I was discussing about accepting cognitive dissonance, which we do
Mhm.
every day in our lives, and accepting that you can have thought one thing and it might be okay to reevaluate it, and you might still, reevaluation doesn't mean a shift always. And so thinking about it more as a process than an outcome. I think there's a lot of fear over, oh no, I'm never going to be able to listen to this music again. I'm never going to be able to watch this director again. And it's actually just reconsidering, talking to people that you trust, also even being willing to talk about it. I mean, sometimes that's the thing. Sometimes there's a not even willingness to talk about it, which is why I value the series so much, because the whole point is just to kind of explore the questions. Something we do is we have a handout for every screening, and they're all available on our website too, which I'll share so that everyone who's watching can see it. But the handouts present 5 to 7 questions that we've come up with along with the guest speaker ahead of time, so that if there are people in the audience who don't want to speak up or who aren't feeling as comfortable in the setting or what have you, they have this kind of framework for how we're thinking about it and questions that they might consider. So yeah, I think it's about evaluation and not about assuming that what the outcome is going to be if you're reevaluating your relationship to anything you love.
Yeah, I would say that, I mean, and there's so much work to be done in this area, but one thing that we focus on with the groups at OL Slayton, so with the boys groups, I'm actually working together with an established program called a Men Together, and that's
Mm.
the YWCA. And the sort of main goal of a Men Together is to make an environment where young men grow up with a more healthy view of how to do relationships, how to interact with partners, in addition to some other life skills, other soft skills and things like that. But we do try to introduce these ideas about consent and healthy relationships and dealing with your emotions so that you don't become abusive and all of these sorts of things. I mean, I in my view, I think it just takes, I guess, to be cliche, it does really take a village, right? I
Mhm.
think it takes what you guys are doing. I think it takes that on the community level, but also there's gonna have to be some fundamental change in just a lot of people's households. And what I mean by that is there seems to be a culture, and it really spans across racial backgrounds and socioeconomic status, but there's a culture where, you know, um, if you have a daughter, for instance, I've had 2 daughters. If you have a daughter, for instance, as a father, you're very protective, and there's certain things you don't want her to be exposed to, or what have you. But if you have a son, and I have many friends who have had sons, well, it's okay to do all of these other different things, right? We're taking our sons to Hooters and Twin Peaks and stuff like this, right? Or we're cheering them on if a girl likes them, or something of that
Sure,
nature.
sure.
And all of these sorts of things, as we talked about earlier, that are just sort of implanted over time. And I don't know, I don't really have all the answers, but I know that it's going to take an approach from all sides. But we do have some comments here.
Okay, okay.
um, Oh, funny comment from Nick Richards says Roadhouse reuses so many beats from Dirty Dancing using the exact same music cue when the main couple gets together. Drive me nuts every time. So that's cool.
You should come
Um,
speak at one of our screenings. That sounds like a film expert. Yeah.
yeah, Nick, go to Sexism Cinema and speak your truth there, sir.
Reach out to me.
David, yeah, David Puga says a lot of movies you've mentioned tend to be drama or comedy
Mm,
in a quote realistic setting. Do y'all
sure.
ever go into more genre movies, i.e., sci-fi, fantasy, superheroes? In recent years, those have had more cultural prevalence and
Yeah.
sometimes reinforce the sexist stereotypes or end
Mm.
up being really subversive in dismantling them. And then we have another one from Dane, but I'll let you tackle that one.
So I would say that the genre we've engaged or screened the most is probably horror, which often has elements of, fantasy or what have. So we've done It Follows, A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. I'm actually looking at our former And a couple, I think so we've had movies with magical elements, but it's definitely an area that we could dig into even more deeply. We do take recommendations too from colleagues, from community members, from anyone about films they'd love to see screened. Also, there's a glut of films, like for example, well, I don't want to get it wrong, but there's a lot of films that might be really, really popular that we would love to screen, and the Alamo, it's a permissions issue. But there are some of the big blockbusters that we think would be, especially that our students are watching constantly and engaging on many different levels, right? Because there's all these different marketing engagements with these films, but we can't always get them. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I can kick in my recommendation and
please,
also speak to this, I would say Aliens
we
is
did
one of my favorite female protagonists. It's a genre film.
we did Aliens.
Ripley is
We did it.
an amazing female character.
We did it fall 2018. It was a huge hit. We had a great speaker. We had two speakers. And yeah, sometimes every now and then I wish we could rescreen because like we have a new audience, but we haven't quite gotten there yet. But yes, excellent. We did Aliens and yeah. We try to do the horror films in October.
Oh, of course. But I did want to back up. This isn't like a side tangent, but something Adam was saying, this just reminded me of it. And I think it's, maybe interesting or pertinent to this conversation. I was listening to this person also talking about their book, and it was like one of those things where you get in, you hear a snip of a conversation on the radio, and then you back out before you even know like what it was, who was talking, what it was about, or whatever. But this person was saying, like, even from a super early age, like kids are toddlers, and if it's a boy child shows any interest at all in a girl child, immediately all the adults around them are like, oh, look who's got a girlfriend, like it's a match made in heaven or whatever. And they're kind of immediately pushing these children into kind of a, it'll just call it like a sexually related kind of framework. And they, this person that wrote this book was saying, like, we should let our kids have different sex friends that are just platonic friendships. Like, there's no reason to put that baggage on it, because it like sets up this framework where from just the most earliest of ages that there isn't just a natural platonic human base level relationship between men and women in our culture. And I just thought that was like such an interesting thing, because I see that all the time. That was the thing that everybody loved to tease me with when I was a little bitty child, is I would go into my grandma's office, and if I interacted with any of her female colleagues, they're like, oh, Josh has a girlfriend, and so I just thought that was so interesting, and something that I hadn't like really considered until they put that out there, is that like we don't even let little kids have platonic opposite sex friendships, and that sets them up for all these later things that you see where there's like war of the sexes and whatnot. Anyway, maybe anybody wants to get in.
I have a young son, and I cannot tell you. I mean, I'm sure it's better than when I was a little bit. It's a lot of, oh, he's such a flirt, or oh, what a heartbreak. But I have been, I mean, I'm just like, what do you mean? What do you mean he's flirting? That, and I do think it's I don't know when gender constancy starts, but I'm like, he's just like enjoying his friends, enjoying he is just playing. And the whole like, oh, he has a crush, or oh, that's his girlfriend. I do think that even though it seems innocuous, it's not. It creates us and them, and it also creates, as you're describing, how you're meant to relate to what to a girlfriend, to a boyfriend. It's just I think it's exactly what we're describing. You're mediating values from the adults around you.
Yeah,
definitely. This is something that I experienced the whole time I was growing up. I remember everything being centered around my ability or not to get a girlfriend.
Oh
And
boy.
I remember, so I've never liked dancing, never in life. I'm sure many people will be dismayed by that as well. I've never liked dancing. And I remember being told, oh, well, you're never going to get a girlfriend because girls like to dance, right? So yeah, definitely can relate to that. We do have another comment here that I think is a great question here by Dane.
Okay.
He says, too often we look back at movies like the John Hughes films and they make us cringe with the way problematic behavior is portrayed. Which movies do you believe have held up well viewed through a modern, socially progressive lens? Perhaps one that was ahead of its time.
Gosh, y'all are really challenging my film knowledge, and I feel like I'm letting you down because it is not, as I said, my field. And I know my colleagues tomorrow are going to have like an extensive list for me. Again, I'm not really like I'm not a film expert. There's some films, even, there's some films we've watched. I'm going through the ones we've watched and thinking about older ones. Um, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, no. That would not be one of them. Working Girl, no. I mean, I'd be interested to hear if there's any that our audience thinks have held up well. I know there are, but again, it's not my expertise, unfortunately.
Yeah, there may be, if anybody knows any films, if anybody's watching right now, knows any films that you feel have held up and are solid and portray things in a healthy way. I don't know, man. I can't I came up in the 90s
Sure.
and I remember when I was very young in the 80s, it was way worse in the 80s. TV and film was like
Mm-hmm.
just ridiculous with the different things being portrayed on all levels. I don't know. Maybe you got to go back way,
Oh,
way
I
back.
have an idea. I have an idea. This, again, I'm not an expert on this, so please, but my husband is a huge fan of the show Family Ties. Are you familiar with this show? uh, Michael J. Fox's original. And I've seen some episodes in passing that I am floored by how progressive they are in terms of, certainly in terms of sexism. Maybe not other things, but there's like kind of a Me Too episode. There's an episode about the daughters struggling with older men making comments like the ones we were discussing. Yeah, so I've been impressed with that television show, but that
You
doesn't
know,
really
now
count.
that you say that, so I remember, and my mom had her favorite shows when I was growing up. I remember Three's Company was one.
Mm.
That was definitely not for this conversation that we're having now, but one that I do remember that was very popular was Golden Girls.
Mm.
And I think that that probably could stand up because you had different representations of women. You didn't have one singular, like you said, one singular form of feminism. And I can't remember the names. I'm sorry. I know there was like Rose and Blanche, and I can't remember all the names, but I remember you had the one lady that was like sort of always dating people, and you
Blanche.
had that right. You had that version, and then you had sort of the two other ladies who were sort of like more deadpan and whatever, right? Like I think that could probably hold up because I feel like that was just different representations of women that I don't think you really saw a lot during those days.
Well, and it has resurged in popularity recently. There's kind of this
Yeah.
whole Golden
Oh,
Girls
makes sense.
women attachment. Yeah. So,
Yeah, I
Cool.
think it's been a while since I've seen an episode, but I think you're right about that. I bet Golden Girls would really hold up.
mm.
So, okay, I mean, we're getting down here to the end. You already mentioned this, but refresh us. How can people get involved in
Mm.
movie club, specifically sexism cinema?
Yeah.
When can they
Put
catch
the website
shows?
in the chat. Is that useful?
Yes.
It's literally
Yeah,
I'll
absolutely.
I'll put it down in the comments
Yeah.
too.
So that has resources, ways to contact us, Instagram, all those things. It's the first Wednesday of every month during the semester, but then film club is every single Wednesday night. So if you're interested and even broader discussions around film, you should go to Film Club as well. And Sexism Cinema is like a subsidiary of Film Club or part of it. But we just tend to focus, as I said, specifically on all the things I've described. If you're interested in certain films to screen or conversations to have, right, just come up to us. We're all waiting outside the theater every time, or you can email based on from the website. We're always open to suggestions, ideas, people who are interested in speaking, people who think of someone that would like to speak, right? We don't know everyone. in the community. We rely on suggestions, engagement, and we do, just for anyone who's watching, we do a pre-screen with the speaker, so you're not just kind of thrown up there in front of an audience. We screen the film together, we sit down, we kind of talk about our mission and how it coincides with the speaker's work and expertise, and kind of also prep them for the kinds of questions we typically see and what that might look like for their field.
Neat, great. And then is there anything else that, like, we didn't catch that you want to make sure and slip in before we close the door, or anything else that you'd like to promote or uplift, or
No, I love this
give
series. I'm really
flowers to?
grateful that I was doing the work I was doing and became a part of it. I'm sorry that I'm not more of an actual film expert, as I think one of the beauties of our team is that we are interdisciplinary, but then, that creates overlaps and gaps. So I'm always excited when film experts come, because there's such a different, as I said, lexicon around that, and how even just how a body is like shown on a screen, or the way a space is represented in a screen. Like we had an architect speak one time on the way buildings were represented in what's the movie? It's gone, but regardless, and how that shaped kind of our relationship to the characters, and by way of that, to gender, sexuality, class, race, etc. So no, I don't have anything else. I'm really glad to have come. I'm really grateful to y'all for doing this, and
No, you
I
do
think
have something else. Tell us about your book and what its
Yep.
title is, and when we can look for it.
This is a collection of poems. It's coming out in fall 2024 with University of Akron Press, and it is called Ladysmith. So I'm sure I'll do a book party in Lubbock, and I hope you'll come.
Very
Well, that
cool.
was timely
Please,
because
please
Kim
share
just
that.
put in the comments, "What about Lady Smith?" So there you go. There's
Perfect.
the plug for Lady Smith on two fronts
Thanks.
there.
That's so
So
nice. That's so nice. Yeah. But yeah, it's all poems. So I don't know how many mediated values we're getting from poetry lately, but I wish more. So
Definitely.
go read my poems. Yeah.
No, well, I'm so glad you could join us for this conversation. I think it's a really important one to be having, and I
Thank
hope
you.
everybody makes it out to many films.
Mhm.
And thank you for joining us and talking about this, Jessica. It's been really great.
Thank you for having us. Having me. It was a lot of fun. And I will see y'all soon.
Hey,
awesome.
thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Okay,
Well,
so
we
Josh,
almost
we
took up the
got
whole hour,
some.
dude.
Yeah, we almost spent the whole hour. We got 10 minutes. Are we gonna do some updates, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think that there's really only one thing that I thought that we should share with folks, and when we don't have the time to unpack this, maybe we'll go into this a little bit more in a subsequent show. But folks that have been watching us for a minute would be aware that late last year, in the finalizing of the Unified Development Code, one of the last steps that the city did was form a committee to look at the specific topics of amortization, a longtime advocacy area of ourselves and many others, and what at the time they were calling and are calling strategic downzoning, basically locating areas of the city that might be, for lack of a better term, like vestigial zoning, that's like leftover vacant lots that are zoned away that might not be conducive to that neighborhood or area anymore, maybe never were. Anyway, so they formed a committee to look at these two issues, and kind of gave them a charge and a resolution to investigate things like, are people in the city subsequent to, or subject to disproportionate effects from industrial zoning? Are there quantifiable levels of blight from abandoned industrial areas, and a whole bunch of different charges? The city formed this committee, appointed a bunch of members to it, gave them till the spring to do their work, and they've been meeting since November. We've been following this and making comments ourselves, a bunch of our colleagues and friends. Also, the East Side industrial community ultimately was engaged in this committee. And they had a meeting today where kind of they came to what I'm interpreting is like what they feel like is the conclusion of their work. And I don't know, Adam, maybe you want to say some of the outcomes and what today's meeting was like.
Yeah, so basically, the two main policy charges that they had was to look at amortization, which essentially is a way for a business to recoup costs if it has to move, right? If it's the zoning of it has changed and they can't do that thing they do in that spot any longer. Amortization is a tool to help that business recoup costs that it takes for them to move. Okay. This is something we've talked about a lot on the show and all over the place. So that was one of the policy charges that they had. The second policy charge they had was, should the city look into strategic downzoning, which means maybe looking at some of these especially vacant lots, but other spaces that are currently zoned industrial next to residential neighborhoods, and should we change those to something different, something lower? And the thing that we had been advocating for in this regard was to change those to transitional. And what transitional means in a zoning context is that whatever use is happening there, if that business should leave or something of that nature, the next thing can't be that same type of thing. That's what transitional means. And so we were advocating for this, especially for the vacant lots, but also even for the active industrial facilities, to change those to transitional, because it does nothing to the business today. It doesn't make them stop operating. It doesn't change anything about what happens for that business. It also, unfortunately, doesn't in the immediate term do a whole lot to remedy things that the community is dealing with, as far as toxic releases from that facility or cottonseed oil or whatever it happens to be. But what it does do is it provides a stop to that sort of activity. And so it lets everybody know, anybody that may be interested in moving into one of those empty lots, or if one of those businesses closes and somebody else wants to move in, it sends a clear signal that you can't do that thing here. You can't do more of the industrial stuff next to these neighborhoods. And so that's what we were advocating for. That's essentially where everything landed. There has been a new state law that was enacted in this last Texas legislative session that's called Senate Bill 929, which essentially gave municipalities in Texas the authority to do amortization, but it essentially ensured that that will never happen ever. So essentially the short story of Senate Bill 929 that Texas enacted says that, yes, a city, if there's an adverse effect from a facility in a community, the city can make the decision to change that zoning and then to tell that business that they can't do that use in that spot anymore. But should they make that decision, the business has the option of which remedy that they choose. And there's one of two that they could choose. They could choose number one, which is the city pays you outright for the market value of that property, and also any costs that are incurred for demolition, relocation, ending leases or mortgages early, or any sort of cost like that. The city would have to pay them outright for all of those things. That's option number one. Option number two is the company could choose amortization, which means that for some period of time, and it would differ depending on the facility or whatever's happening. So if we're talking about one of these huge industrial facilities, right, that have been around for a long time, that amortization period may be 20 or 30 years or more for them to recoup those costs that they have. Well, in that scenario, no business owner ever, and hopefully we could be proved wrong in the future, but no business owner ever, in our opinion, is going to choose amortization. If a city changes the zoning and tells them they have to leave, and those are the two options, that business is not going to say, yeah, amortize me for 20 or 30 years and then I'll leave. They're going to say, pay me or I'm not going anywhere. And most municipalities, Lubbock included, are not going to have the amounts of money available to just throw at one of these facilities to get them to move. And so it pretty much ensures that that's never going to happen. That happened ahead of this committee being created, that it really didn't have much to do with this committee. And so that already had happened. And so there's that part. But the zoning change to transitional is very much within the reach of the council to do. And so that was the recommendation, was that because it's in the state law, in the committee's view, the city didn't need to put it in their own ordinance. And that was also the advice from a requested report from the committee by the city attorney. They requested and they asked, okay, do we need to do this or, not, because it's in the state law? The city attorney said, no, we don't necessarily need to do it because it's in the state law. The only sort of issue that we have with that take on this is that, yes, the state law prescribes the steps that it would take, like what would need to happen for a city to be allowed to discontinue a use. And then it lays out sort of like the amount of time that they have to notify the business, the amount of time the business has to reply and choose which remedy they want, and all of those sorts of things. What it doesn't lay out is, let's say that Lubbock chose tomorrow to do this. And they say, okay, state law allows us to amortize a business or to stop a non-conforming use. And let's say they decided to do this with one of these facilities. There's nothing in that law that prescribes for Lubbock specifically, or any municipality, what are the steps at the local level to even start that process or to see it through. Does that go to planning and zoning? Does that go to the Board of Appeals? Is it only a city council decision? There's all of these sorts of questions that the city could clarify that would be in line with the state law, and that would also provide clear guidance to those here locally if they needed to use that. Okay. And so we're sort of not happy with that part of it. And there was a couple of the committee members that were not voted against that. And so that's how the chips fell. The city of Lubbock, prior to the committee, did already dedicate some money to look at zoning across the city to see if things needed to change. And so the recommendation of the committee in that regard was, yes, the city needs to go ahead and move forward with that plan and look at the zoning, because they did admit several times throughout this process that some zoning in some parts of the city needed to change. We laid out very clearly what the policy timeline was that led us to where we are today. And so they understood that and saw that, yes, there is a problem. Yes, certain communities are impacted more negatively than others because of this, and something needs to be done. And so that admission was made, but it was not formally made. And one of the committee members, Miss Mary Kreitz, actually pushed back on this and was saying that the committee needed to make a more clear stance, because it actually was one of their charges, was to determine if any communities in Lubbock were disproportionately impacted by these sorts of things. And the answer is clearly yes. But they didn't, the call from Miss Mary Kreitz was to actually have that in their official recommendation, to say, yes, the committee recognizes this, and then whatever the decisions were on amortization or downzoning. And so the only thing that really came out of that was that they recommend that the city go forward with the looking at downzoning. And so a small win. It does move the needle closer to where we can get to a place where we can move forward and have a better future in this regard. But still some frustrations there. And so that's pretty much what happened. That's the gist of it. We'll of course keep everybody updated on this as this goes along. The next steps here are the committee has to formalize their recommendations that will more than likely go to a work session for the city council, where the chair of this committee will present those recommendations and also answer any questions that the council may have concerning how they got to those recommendations or anything else they may want to know. And so we will for sure let you know as we know when those things are going to happen. We will let you all know so that you can be aware of those things. We'll of course show up and give our public comments and try to continue to advocate around this issue, but that's where everything is as of right now.
No, I think that's pretty well encapsulated. I mean, there's so much more I could say about this. Lord knows I spent my afternoon mad. I know you did as well. And I'd really like to dig in there, but I think you've summarized that pretty well. And yeah, I would also echo that because this is going to council, like all things, ultimately it's their call. Because this is headed back to council, it's not too late to speak your piece on this. Write your city council members, write any council members you might feel so moved to, and especially the mayor who represents everybody. And, we would be happy to facilitate you getting engaged in this work if it's something that you're so moved by. I know we're just 2 minutes over, but we want to plug just a couple of things, announcements. Lubbock Compact, people may or may not be aware, has a supporting membership, folks that either are financial donors to our organization and supporters in that way, and or they might be volunteers with our organization. These people who have done this over the course of a calendar year are our members. And this year we changed our construction a little bit so that we draw some members onto our governing board, the folks that make decisions about how our organization moves and what it does, from our membership. It's voted on by the membership. And so here at the end of this year, we held those elections from among our members and appointed 3 new at-large board members to serve for 1 year on Lubbock Compact's governing board. And we want to announce those people and congratulate them. And those folks are Mr. Andrew Lasimbi, Ms. Emily Hobson, and Mr. James McKay. Some of these folks you've met, some of them you might have seen out there in the community with their volunteer work. Others we're looking forward to introducing to people, but we want to congratulate them on their membership onto the governing board. And we also want to thank everybody who, stuck their neck out and was willing to stand for one of these positions, because we had such a remarkable list of candidates, people who we respect and admire, who've contributed so much to our organization, to our community. And so we just want to give a hearty congratulations to those that won their vote, and to everybody else who stood for a vote. We want to say how much you mean to us, that we thank you. Adam, anything else to contribute to that?
No, I think that buttons it up quite nicely. We are 4 minutes over, and so yeah, I think that's all we have for today. Everybody go check out Sexism Cinema with Dr. Jessica Smith and her fellow board members. Something different to do, right? We're always looking for something different to do in Lubbock. I think this is a very neat idea. I am gonna go check out some of this and get involved in that myself. So do that. Look into Sexism Cinema, and we'll be back here next week.
Yeah, great. See you then.
Awesome. See you later. Bye.